go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. I'm your host, Angel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel. We're glad that you're with us for this episode of Ask Anything because today we're going to be discussing the clarity of data-driven strategic goals with two of our own. Marcus Reed and James McKean are joining us today to discuss this topic. In an age overflowing with information, organizations have more data at their fingertips than ever before. But turning that data into clear, actionable objectives is where the real challenge and opportunity lies. When strategic goals are shaped by evidence rather than assumptions, teams gain a shared understanding of what success looks like and how to measure it. Today, we'll unpack why clarity matters, how data can sharpen your strategic focus, and what practices can help leaders avoid the common pitfalls of vague or misaligned objectives. Whether you're a business leader, an analyst, or simply passionate about making better decisions, this conversation will help you harness data to drive purposeful, transparent, and impactful goals. But before we get to that, let's welcome our guests, Marcus Reed and Jim McKean. Gentlemen, welcome back to Ask Anything. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you.
Hi, Angel. Thanks for having us back.
It's great to have you guys. You guys always bring it with these topics. So I'm sort of excited to talk about this because, as always, I'm a little bit of knowledgeable on these things, but I let you guys do the talking, and then I'll do the learning. So, what do you say we begin? When you think about setting strategic goals, what are the first steps you take to ensure those goals are genuinely data-driven rather than based on intuition or tradition?
A good place to begin is actually kind of thinking about what we mean when we're talking about strategic goals. So a strategy actually has a formal definition, even though most organizations don't quite think about it this way. A strategy is a set of decisions that you make about how you're going to allocate the resources you've got to accomplish some goal, some meaningful goal to you. And each one of those things actually lends itself to being metric driven, right? So you could think about what the goals are and how you know whether or not you're going to get there. You could think about what resources you have available to you under your control that you can allocate. You can think about how those are getting used and allocate. And you can think about where exactly those all kind of fit into your organization, right? So all of those things are what's the word I'm trying to say? They can
Measurable?
be metrified. They're measurable. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Yes, they're all measurable.
Able to be metrified.
Metrified. That's
cool
what I was
too.
trying to.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a good
Kind of cool
new
too.
term. It's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I would say is a great place to begin, right?
Yeah. And I think that in the real world, we often see in leadership, along with a tendency to manage up, a tendency to measure at that level also, or in that direction also. So you've got your budgets, you've got your P&Ls, you've got your ROIs. What does that mean, especially in IT, when we're talking about ROI, right? So that's one place to start with more meaningful metrics. And then once we've established our strategy and how we're going to allocate those resources to accomplish specific measurable goals, what about downward, right? Mm-hmm. What about our retention? What about our effectiveness, right? And I say that very particularly, not efficiency. Effective and efficient are often at odds with each other. So that's when, as a leader, we need to get our board excited, our peers excited about our organizational health, right? And that's more than just culture. It's more than just vibes. At least it can be, right? Too often it's just that. Too often it's a sense of how things are going. Too often I talk to my managers and say, how's everybody doing? And they say, fine. And I say, okay, great. Back to the boardroom, right? So we have an opportunity now to actually create metrics that tie to tactics that roll up to that strategy that Jim talked about. Are we increasing autonomy, mastery, purpose? Are our internal processes hidebound and still, are they legacy? Or are we thinking about the way we work now and changing some of those processes, the way we could work, to be more not just efficient, but effective. And what I mean by that is delivering the maximum value to our stakeholders and our end users, as opposed to focusing just on the budget, right? The budget is a guardrail metric. It's not our North Star metric, right? Our North Star metrics need to be, and I know you're not supposed to have more than one North Star, but let's just, real life, we often do. So we want to improve retention. We want to improve our internal processes for our throughput to be faster, clearer, better. That's about being effective, not just about being efficient. Efficiency metrics and budget and stuff like that, we're treating ourselves like a cost center. And more IT is a value driver for the business. So we need to start measuring ourselves that way so that we start thinking that way and are seen that way.
I agree completely with that, Marcus. Sometimes it's useful to think about leading versus lagging indicators. A lot of times when you're talking at that high level strategic level, you're actually talking about lagging indicators. If you're talking about the P&L, you're talking about last month's P&L or last quarter's P&L, right? You're not talking about Tuesday's P&L, or even worse, next Tuesday's P&L. How does that work, right? So those are lagging indicators, and they're really important to map movement towards big goals. But if you don't provide the organization with leading indicators, that is the things that we are doing, which we believe doing more of, or potentially doing less of, affects those lagging indicators, then people don't understand what to do, what to actually do today in order to affect those big numbers, right? And a lot of times leaders lose track of that a little bit. To do that, they really kind of have to understand, what the world looks like from the people who are going to be making these decisions.
Yeah. And I was going to say, because the composition of that question, what's really interesting to me is how do we avoid being biased by intuition or tradition? Because sometimes as we're, and I'm sure you guys can talk about this, but sometimes as we often find ourselves thinking about, well, the last time we did it this way, so this has been traditionally done this way here. Why are we even thinking of looking at this goal and maybe changing the strategy around it if we've done this historically this way and it's been great? But like you guys were saying, what are the ROI, the return on investment, et cetera? How can you make that maybe even more by just doing a rightfully so strategic change?
Yeah. One good example is thinking about modernizing methodology. I'm going to say it, ask forgiveness of the audience. Please stay with me. Agile transformation.
Oh, no.
Is a good example of, we used to be waterfall. We used to make software or new products, new services, whatever, all in one, we would work on it and work on it and work on it from a static set of requirements. And we're going to quietly work over here in the corner for a year or two and then roll it out to you. It's kind of like having a cannon and trying to shoot something a mile away. Instead, we're going to bring the target closer and get out a bow and arrow. And we're going to hit that thing every single time we try, because it's close, and we're using arrows instead of cannonballs. We're providing you with the stakeholder or the end user with a little bit of value over and over and over again every day. Those requirements are not static, they're dynamic. They change over time. We don't work on it if it's 5 years old and we're not sure that that's even still pertinent or valuable. We're going to pick the freshest stuff that we know that people want. So getting out of that traditional mindset into something more effective. To Jim's point, you've got a budget, you've got a P&L, that you need to support, right? But you're allocating those resources in this newer way. And you need to start with a baseline to go, how often do we deliver value to the business or to our end users? How frequently do we deliver value? How frequently do we deliver something? And one of the metrics you can have now, if you're a software shop, for example, you can see how often people use that new feature that you just rolled out. And if you're working from 5-year-old requirements or even 1-year-old requirements, you might release a new feature that nobody ends up using. So figure out what your baseline is there, and then work to improve it. Everything that we roll out is really popular. It gets lots of clicks in our application.
Some of the metrics you're talking about, frequency of release and how people are using it, some of those are actually really good examples of leading indicators, right? If you're releasing things often, and if you're basically adjusting your aim every time to see what's happening, the chances of you getting closer and closer to your end user requirements are just getting better and better and better and better. Then that will start showing up in those big lagging indicators down the road as you get better and better and better at doing those leading indicators. You have to give a group a set of metrics, make them responsible for a set of metrics that they can actually have levers that they can pull to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you don't, they're just, it's deer in the headlights, right? How can they affect those big ones? They really can't.
Yeah. Back to a prior conversation we had about autonomy, mastery, and purpose increasing. Get a baseline sentiment analysis.
Yes.
Of, yes, I work with a team. No, I work solo. Nobody else understands what I do. Yes, everybody else understands what I do. You get all these ranges, and remeasure as you go through that methodology modernization, whatever form or shape it takes for your company. There's no such thing as a pure agile anything, but you want to see those going up, and you're going to see your retention going up. You're going to see your internal skill sets getting bigger and bigger because people are cross-training more and more. So those are some non-traditional metrics that you've got to establish a baseline. No matter how bad if you're a leader and you're like, no, we're really good. We're going to get even better. But I don't want to do a baseline measurement right now on how developers feel about our single source of truth architecture, because we don't have one. Right?
Right.
No, establish the baseline anyway. Show everybody and let everybody see for themselves as a group, you're going from 0 to whatever the next measurement is on that.
So let's talk about those metrics and how they might impact the bigger picture. So how do you design metrics or success criteria that are both objective and accessible so that individual contributors can see how their work connects to bigger picture targets, while also inspiring confidence among board members?
I come back to the baseline. It's so important to set that baseline. And when we're talking about sentiment, okay, I as a leader have a feeling, and it's probably pretty trustworthy. I've got good instincts, right? But it's still just a feeling. If I ask everybody in my organization to answer questions about using a single source of truth architecture, about a sense of shared purpose, about increasing mastery, about our tools, planning and tracking, documentation, right? And I gather all that data across the whole organization with 99% participation. Suddenly I have a data set. And if my developers or my org in general or my middle management or whatever feels like our documentation tooling is fractured, then it is. That is not just a feeling, right? That's become something concrete that we can apply ourselves to and remeasure over time and demonstrate to the board. The sentiment analysis is going up because this is the concrete thing we did. This is how I spent that money. And now this is how I can tie that back to our higher quality, our end user participation in this new feature set is higher because the documentation's better. We got it out faster because our onboarding time is much lower, right? That's another thing you can measure is onboarding time. You can measure almost anything now.
This idea that Marcus is talking about of like measuring, comparing, remeasuring, there may also be an adjustment. There may be like a leading indicator that I genuinely believe was the answer to one of my lagging indicators, and I was wrong. I got it wrong. But that data will tell me, oh, don't waste any more time here. do this thing because look, it's actually having an impact, right? So as you cycle through the process, your longer term answers get more and more credible as you show evidence that, hey, releasing more frequently has this kind of an impact on whether it's user sentiment or on the bottom line. More people are willing to buy our software because we're doing frequent updates. The truth will emerge out of the data, right?
Yeah.
What you don't want to do is be a little bit careful about like pinning everything on absolutely this is the answer, right? Because if it turns out it isn't the answer, it's good, right? Then it's going to be very tempted as a leader to buckle down and say, by God, this is the answer, and we just have to do it harder, right? and that's unlikely to like get you where you want to go.
Yeah. You might find out you start releasing more frequently. Your production bugs go down, but instead of your stakeholders trusting you more, it's clear that they trust you less and less because they're flooded. It's too much OCM, too much organizational change management, too much this or that. You don't know where the data is going to lead you. The important thing is to set the baseline and watch the trend, remeasure and watch the trends.
Right.
Interesting. So could either of you share an example of how you turned raw data into clear tactics that teams can implement? What made that process effective?
We did a deep dive with a client, a large insurance company that is not any of our current clients. So if you're listening, it's not about you. And when we showed that in certain parts of the IT organization, the people who, your makers, your coders, your testers, felt like their tooling platform was completely fractured. And they had to re-enter data manually between systems to keep their PMO happy, their project managers happy, and all this stuff. And it was shocking. It takes a lot of trust for an organization to let us do something like that. But when we revealed our findings to the C-suite, there was just shock in the room. And the concrete guidance there was very straightforward. Get on a single source of truth architecture and stop having your different units use different tools all the time. Stop paying people to do manual data entry and re-entry. Enter it once, it propagates through the whole system. That alone increased not necessarily their efficiency, but more importantly, their effectiveness as an organization. They spent time doing value add work a lot more than they had been before.
Yeah, well, that was one of the ones I was thinking about. That was a good project, and we both worked on it together, and it was pretty effective.
Yeah.
There was another project that I was working on with a large national organization, and it had to do with rolling out some new data centers. So it was a very infrastructure kind of a project, and our initial approach to it. We were using some very talented vendors to do it, and we were using a very structured waterfall approach to do it. And it did not take very long before the inevitable happened, and that was we were behind schedule. And this was a critical project because the data centers were being built in preparation for bidding on a government project. And we could not bid. We're not going to be allowed to bid on the project unless we prove that we had the computing resources to support it. Right. So the fact that, if we were 30 days late, not unreasonable for the project of this size, it would have been too late because we would have missed the deadline for the thing. It had to be done on time. So what we did was we took that delivery date as a given, and we began to work backwards on what it was going to take. And then the metrics that we built around the team that was working on it were very much in their wheelhouse. It was about power centers and HVAC and server deployment and virtual server allocation. It was kind of all about those very specific things. And it was all driven not so much by having the data center complete, but having the data center able to meet the requirements that we needed in order to put in the thing for the contract, right? That's what had to happen. So we kind of took that apart and then worked backwards and then built a set of metrics for that team. And the other thing we did was we made the team smaller. We were starting to like address this by just throwing manpower at the project. And the problem is, as soon as you do that, communication lines get snarled, coordination between the group gets harder. You reach a point where the overhead of managing the larger team overcomes any advantage you get from the thing. So all this was around figuring out kind of what's the right size for the team. And we ended up with a 5-person team. They had the right skill sets. They could deliver across the team. We would bring in contractors if we needed them for very specific heavy lifting kinds of things. But all of that was kind of built around watching those metrics and then watching our progress towards the ability to actually bid on the contract.
Yeah. And you took two of the oldest, most intuitive metrics in the world, a deadline and headcount.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And deconstructed the deadline. And then, if we took that scenario into another client, we might find out, hey, the communications are snarled. There are too many bottlenecks. There's too many approval gates.
Yeah.
Right. That aren't adding value. And so we actually need to have a smaller set of people working on this, or maybe in the organization or whatever. And that's a good example of a new approach that can be a little scary for leadership.
Oh yeah.
If you intuitively measure your strength and power by the head count underneath you on the org tree, then why would you take power away from yourself?
Yeah.
But if you're a leader who is laser focused on effectiveness, and that you have to help your peers and your bosses appreciate that about you.
Yep.
Show them these metrics, right? This is what we found out. Jim was doing this in a flash deadline scenario, but a similar thing could play out over time with one of our clients. Those tactics become part of the strategy in terms of those upward looking metrics.
And the segues in this conversation today are awesome. So speaking of those types of approaches,
planned this very carefully.
What approaches have you both found effective in showing both teams and senior leadership that new data sources or metrics are actually helping them improve outcomes?
I'm struggling to answer that quickly because typically it's self-explanatory. When you're talking about at the team level, the managers on down, Jim mentioned deadlines, which are often, let's be honest, they're set because you have to have a deadline or else nobody will do anything, right? That's your feeling. We have coached lots of organizations to kind of set that on its side and measure the throughput of the teams, not the individuals, but the teams that we help form or that are formed for us by technical, expertise or whatever, or project-based. We help them find ways to measure that team's throughput. And okay, are we happy? Like, not with this number, but are we happy with what we see them doing? The frequency of their value delivery, the amount of their value delivery, the amount of time they're spending on value add tasks and not admin stuff or manual data reentry and stuff like that. Are we happy with this? Yes, we are. Okay. That's that team's baseline, and they self-manage, right? They know what their throughput is, and they want to maintain that throughput or increase that throughput. So now, instead of giving them a deadline, we go maintain your throughput and or work with us to help improve your throughput. And so when are we going to have this done? It's not a deadline that somebody said a year ago. We're showing what the team can do and saying, this is the natural time to expect this value delivery from us. Teams like that a lot because we're giving them realistic deadlines, and management likes it a lot, and our stakeholders like it a lot because we're delivering when we said we would deliver, which was the original purpose of the deadline. But now it's actually real and based on throughput, not based on a really good guess or a really convincing conversation with a stakeholder.
It's very, very rare that the doers, whether they're programmers or designers or whatever their role is, will object to the fact that you're giving them a set of metrics that are meaningful to them. Because what they'll very quickly see is that addressing these is moving me forward. There's a sense of progress that is, frankly, it makes people feel very positive about themselves, right? That layer in the organization is almost never the problem. They go right to this stuff. It makes perfect sense to them, right? And they're often wondering why in the world we haven't done this years ago. As you go up in the organization, the activities of those groups in the minds of the people you're talking to are less clearly connected to the big goal, whatever the big goal is, right? So you need to figure out how to make that happen. That's a job for someone like Marcus or I to help connect those dots together. If there's going to actually be resistance in this whole process, it'll probably happen in the middle. The middle layer people are the people who are feeling like, I ought to be telling those guys to do that. That's my job. If I don't have that job, what am I for? Right. And so those folks can have, you really have to help them find another way forward, right? Whether it's a digital transformation into an agile environment or some other kind of major change. If you're going to have an issue where you have embedded behaviors, it's most likely going to happen kind of in that middle layer.
Before we go, let's talk about the abundancy, if you will, of potential metrics and dashboard that might exist. So with so many of those potential metrics and dashboards, how do you prevent measurement fatigue and keep everyone focused on the most meaningful indicators of success?
Well, trial and error, usually.
That's fair.
Old reliable.
Not all data is helpful and not every metric is interesting. I mentioned before North Star and guardrail metrics. Finding the right balance of those is important. And it does involve a little trial. It involves adjustment. You want to get there as quickly as you can. Reassess what you're measuring frequently, just like we're measuring frequently, we're assessing our measurements frequently to make sure that we're measuring the most interesting things to help us towards that strategy, the strategic success. If you set a few, again, apologies for saying there's a few North Stars, but if you set a few North Star metrics, then you got to figure out what your guardrail metrics are. If I'm trying to get to my North Star and I'm staring at it and I'm not looking around, I might realize I'm on the top of a mountain and there's not enough air up here, right? So we've got to make sure that we're continuing to assess as we go and making sure that our retention is still solid, our throughput is still solid. Like maybe we're releasing frequently, like I said before, but stakeholders don't actually like that. We got to slow down a little bit because we're overwhelming them with small releases. So we got to measure not just frequency of release, but stakeholder satisfaction as a guardrail. Both of those are going up together, great. But we might find out, oh, one of them's going down as the other one comes up. We need to adjust for that.
And the only thing I would add to any of that is there is a tendency for people to select the metrics that they're going to use from a relatively limited menu. And that is the metrics they have available to them right now. Whether it's what's showing up in a report or, whatever it is, they will pick from that menu. And sometimes you have to help them see that this metric's close, but if we did this, if we divided that number by the number of hours people are spending on something, this is a new interesting number, right? And that maybe that number would be more useful. So sometimes it just takes someone to help prod them to understand how connected these things really can be. And I think that Marcus and I are both, basically analysts. We help people like take apart organizational information and help them put together workflows and processes. But we're also kind of coaches, right? And sometimes we have to go into an organization and just help people look at something through a different set of lenses. right?
Mhm.
And actually working with metrics can really be very helpful.
Yeah, and you don't think metrics and creativity, right? They're not exactly peanut butter and jelly in a general understanding, but they really are. Creativity is important, and I'll add objectivity. Jim mentioned being coaches, and we definitely play that role at times. And the value of a coach is, yes, to help spur your creativity, but also your objectivity. Because when I go to the gym, my instinct is to do the exercises I'm good at.
Yep.
If I've got a coach, he's going to say, no, you got to do your diamond push-ups. You got to do the rope, right? I don't want to. I'm not very good at it, and it's very uncomfortable. Well, that's exactly why you got to do it. And metrics are the same way. You got to be really objective about what you're measuring, along with your creativity, to really get to the good stuff.
All right. And with that, gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you on Ask Anything. Thank you so much for joining us today again. I certainly appreciate it. Come back. Bring us another great topic.
All right. Thank you very much, Angel. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus. Hang on.
Thank you for listening in to this week's episode of Ask Anything, presented by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to Marcus Reed and Jim McKean talk to us about the clarity of data-driven strategic goals. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your ideas or topics with us on our social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.
Go.